Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. A couple of years ago, I was living in a house near my school with a roommate. I still do not know exactly what to think about what happened there. The house was not especially old-looking or obviously creepy. It was just one of those student houses that had been rented by different groups of people for years. The floors creaked in certain places. The walls were thin. The heating worked when it wanted to, and the bedrooms had been arranged in a way that made privacy feel limited even when the doors were shut. My roommate and I had rooms that were almost exactly the same. They were built as mirror images of one another, with the layout flipped. His closet was on the opposite side from mine. His bed faced the opposite way. His windows were positioned similarly, but reversed. The important part was that we shared one wall. If either of us talked loudly, played music, moved furniture, or got up late at night, the other one could usually hear some version of it. Not clearly enough to understand every word, but enough to know whether the other person was awake, upset, pacing, or having people over. For most of the year, we got along fine. He was graduating soon, while I still had another year left at school. We were in different places mentally. I was thinking about classes, the next semester, plans for the future, and all the normal things that come with still having time left in college. He was carrying a lot more than that. He was dealing with personal problems that seemed to follow him everywhere. I will not go into every detail because they were his struggles, not mine to tell, but it was obvious he was in a difficult place emotionally. He was stressed, exhausted, frustrated, and often surrounded by negativity. Sometimes it came from outside situations. Sometimes it came from the pressure he put on himself. Sometimes it felt like he was trying to keep everything together while the rest of his life was pulling him apart. You could feel it in the house. Not in a supernatural way at first, just in the normal way a person's mood affects the rooms around them. There were nights when he would come home and barely say anything. There were times when I could hear him moving around in his room long after I had gone to bed. Sometimes I would hear him pacing or opening and closing drawers. Sometimes there would be long stretches of silence that somehow felt heavier than noise. His room was always darker than mine, too. That may sound strange because the rooms had the same basic layout and similar windows. But his side of the house always seemed to absorb light differently. He did not decorate much. He kept things simple. He had some furniture, a bed, clothes, school stuff, the usual things. But it never felt settled. There was one area of his room that I noticed more than others. It was the back left corner. Because our rooms were mirrored, I could picture it easily from my own room. In my bedroom, the matching corner did not bother me. It was just a corner near the wall. But in his room, that same area always seemed empty in a way that stood out. At the time, I did not think much about it. I did not avoid it. I did not say anything to him. I had no reason to. It was just a part of the room where he did not keep much of his stuff. But later, that corner became the part I could not stop thinking about. One night, I had a dream. Or at least I have always called it a dream because I do not know what else to call it. It did not feel like a normal dream. Normal dreams have a strange quality to them. Even when they are vivid, there is usually something loose about the logic. Places change. Faces change. You move from one scene to another without knowing how. You accept impossible things because your mind is asleep and does not question them. This did not feel loose. It felt detailed. It felt cold. It felt like I was awake inside the house, except I was not in my bed anymore. In the experience, I got up from my room and walked into the hallway. The house looked exactly the way it did in real life. The lighting was dim. The hallway was narrow. The floors had that dull sound they made late at night when the rest of the house was silent. I could see the outlines of doors and the familiar shape of the hallway leading past the bedrooms. I remember knowing it was nighttime. There was no bright light coming through the windows. There were no sounds from outside. The entire house felt still. I walked out of my room and past my roommate's door. That was when I felt it. The air around his room felt wrong. It was not just cold. It felt heavy. There was a deep pressure coming from behind the door, the kind of feeling that makes your body react before you understand why. It was like stepping near a basement door in an old house and suddenly feeling the urge to move away from it. I stopped in the hallway. I remember standing there, staring at his door. My gut immediately told me not to go in. Not because I heard anything. Not because I saw a shadow under the door. Not because I had any logical reason to think something was wrong. I just had an immediate physical feeling that I should leave. That I should walk back to my room. That I should not open the door. But I was curious. That is what makes me uncomfortable when I remember it. I had this warning feeling, this clear instinct to stay away, and I ignored it. I opened his door. The room was colder than the hallway. Not mildly cool. Not the kind of cold that comes from a window being cracked open or the heater not reaching one side of the house. It felt almost freezing. The cold wrapped around me as soon as I stepped inside. It seemed to settle in my chest and arms. I remember feeling as though the room had no warmth at all, as though I had walked into a place that had been shut away for years. The rest of the room looked mostly normal. His bed was there. His furniture was there. His things were where I expected them to be. But the darkness in the room felt deeper than it should have. I could not see every detail clearly, but I could see enough to know I was in his room. The layout was familiar. The furniture was familiar. The door behind me was still open to the hallway. I should have left. Everything in me was telling me to leave. Instead, I looked toward the back left corner. There was something standing there. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. It was shaped like a figure, but it did not look like a normal person. It was tall enough that it filled the corner in a way that made the room feel smaller. It did not move. It did not speak. It did not reach toward me. It just stood there. I tried not to look directly at it. I remember keeping my eyes slightly away from its face, catching it only in the edge of my vision. But even without staring directly at it, I could tell it was there. The figure was gray. Not pale like a person standing in bad light. Gray in a sickly, dull way. Like the color of wet stone, old ash, or something pulled from deep underwater. Its skin looked rough. Scaly, it reminded me of some old sea creature. Something that had lived too long in a dark place where no sunlight reached. It did not look exactly like an animal, and it did not look exactly like a person. It looked wrong in a way I cannot explain, without making it sound more exaggerated than it felt. The figure was ugly. That is the simplest word for it. Not ugly in a normal human way. Ugly in a way that seemed to make my mind reject it. Its shape, its skin, its presence, everything about it made me feel that I should not be seeing it. Even now, when I talk about it, I get chills. Then I saw my roommate. He was lying face down on the floor. He was directly in front of the figure. For a moment, I could not move. I remember thinking, why is he on the floor? Why is he not waking up? Why is that thing standing over him? He did not look injured in a clear way. I do not remember blood or anything graphic. He just looked unconscious, completely still, like he had collapsed and could not get back up. The figure was standing behind him, or over him. I do not know which word is more accurate. It felt as though it had something to do with why he was there. I wanted to help him. That was the strongest feeling I had. Whatever was in the room, whatever I was seeing, I knew I could not leave him there. I looked up. This time I made direct eye contact with the figure. That was the worst moment. The second I looked into its eyes, I felt something push through me. It was not a physical touch. It was not like a hand grabbing my shoulder or a weight pressing on my chest. It felt deeper than that. It felt like the figure was looking through me, past my body, into something private that I could not protect. The stare was intense enough that I felt almost frozen. My vision started cutting out around the edges. It was like my sight was narrowing. The room began to darken around the figure. I could still see it, but everything else seemed to fade or blink away. The longer I looked into its eyes, the worse it became. My vision would disappear for a second, then return, disappear again, return again. I felt like I was losing control of myself just from looking at it. I looked away. The second I broke eye contact, I could move. I ran toward my roommate. I grabbed his arms. I remember pulling as hard as I could, trying to drag him out of the room. His body felt heavy, much heavier than it should have, but I kept pulling. I dragged him toward the door. The cold in the room seemed to follow us. I did not look back at the corner. I did not want to see whether the figure moved. I did not want to see whether it was watching us leave. I just pulled my roommate into the hallway and got out of the room. That was when the experience ended. I woke up in my own bed. The house was quiet. It was still dark outside. For a few seconds, I did not move. I lay there trying to convince myself that I had only had a dream. But my heart was racing. I felt cold, and the image of that room stayed in my mind with a clarity that normal dreams rarely have. The corner, the gray figure, my roommate on the floor, the eyes, the feeling that something had looked through me. I did not tell him about it, at least not then. I did not want to sound insane. I did not want to tell him that I had a dream about something evil in his room, especially because I knew he was already going through a hard time. I did not want to add another source of fear or make him feel worse, so I kept it to myself. Days passed. Then, weeks. I still thought about it. Every time I walked past his room, I remembered the dream. Every time I heard him moving around late at night, I wondered whether he was okay. Sometimes I wanted to ask him if he felt strange in there, but I never did. There is a fine line between caring about someone and projecting your own fear onto them. I did not want to be that person. The school year continued. He was getting closer to graduation, and the time came when he was preparing to leave. The house became full of moving boxes, laundry piles, final assignments, half-packed drawers, and the usual chaos that comes when someone is about to move out. The night before we left, we were talking. It was one of those late conversations where people finally say things they have avoided saying because they know the living situation is ending. We were talking about school, the future, all the things he had been through, and how strange the year had felt. Then, without me bringing it up, He said something about his room. He told me that he had always felt a heaviness in there. He said the room had a negative feeling that he could not explain. He did not say he saw anything. He did not say he heard voices. He did not say he thought it was haunted. He just said he hated a certain part of the room. He said there was one area where he did not like to be. I remember asking him where. I tried to keep my voice casual. He pointed it out. The back left corner. The exact corner where I had seen the figure. For a second, I did not know what to say. I felt the same cold rush I had felt in the dream. I asked him more questions. I asked whether he had ever seen anything there. He said no, but he said he avoided that side of the room whenever he could. He did not put his belongings there. He did not sleep facing that direction. He did not like standing near it. He said there was no clear reason for it. He just always felt uncomfortable there. The room had been laid out in a way that gave him options. He could have placed furniture in that area. He could have used it for storage. He could have put clothes, boxes, a chair, or anything else there. But he did not. He kept it as empty as possible. He said he would not sleep on that side of the bed either. He did not like having his back toward that corner. Hearing him say that made my stomach drop. Because I had never told him about the dream. I had never mentioned the figure. I had never told him that I saw something standing in the back left corner. I had never asked him whether he felt anything strange in his room until he brought it up himself. So I finally told him. I told him about the dream. I explained that I had walked out of my room and entered his. I told him the room felt freezing. I told him I saw him lying on the floor. I told him there was something standing in the corner. I did not go into every detail immediately. I remember watching his face as I spoke, wondering whether he would laugh, tell me I was being dramatic, or say it was just a dream. He did not laugh. He looked shocked. For a while, neither of us said much. It was one of those moments where both people are trying to decide whether they have accidentally made something scarier by talking about it. He had felt something in the exact place I had seen something. I had dreamed about him being trapped in that room without knowing he avoided that area. Neither of us had told the other before. That does not prove anything supernatural. I know that. Two people can notice the same strange corner in a room for ordinary reasons. Maybe it was darker there. Maybe there was a draft. Maybe the layout made it feel enclosed. Maybe the room had poor lighting, a bad outlet, an uneven wall, or some other physical quality that made it uncomfortable without either of us consciously understanding why. Maybe I had picked up on his discomfort throughout the year without realizing it. Maybe I had noticed how he avoided that corner, how he arranged his furniture, how he never put his things there. And my sleeping mind turned that observation into a nightmare. Maybe I knew more than I thought I knew. That is possible. But it did not feel like that at the time. At the time, it felt like something in that room had focused on him. I had watched him go through so much emotionally that year. I had seen the stress, the exhaustion, the anger, the sadness, and the negativity around him. I knew he was vulnerable. I knew he was struggling. And in my dream, whatever that gray figure was, had been standing over him. It had not been standing near me. It had not been in the hallway. It had not been in my room. It was in his room, directly behind him, in the one corner he hated. Part of me wondered whether the dream was simply my mind giving a shape to his pain. Maybe I had seen him struggling all year and subconsciously imagined it as something dark holding him down. Maybe the figure represented depression, stress, fear, or the pressure he was under. Maybe the freezing room was a symbol of how emotionally shut down he had become. Maybe the entire experience was a nightmare caused by concern for a friend. That explanation makes sense. It is probably the safest explanation. But when I remember the feeling of eye contact with that thing, it is hard for me to see it as only symbolism. It felt too real. It felt like a presence. I have heard people explain things like this in different ways. Some people talk about negative energy. Some people say that when someone is in a dark emotional state, they become more vulnerable to things that feed on fear, sadness, anger, or isolation. I do not know whether I believe that literally. I do not know whether there are beings that attach themselves to people. I do not know whether a low emotional state can attract something outside of us. But I understand why people think that way. When someone is struggling, the darkness around them can feel like more than mood. It can change the atmosphere of a room. It can change the way people speak, sleep, eat, and move through a house. It can make one corner feel colder because everyone associates that space with sadness and stress. Maybe that was all it was. Maybe the figure was my mind's way of understanding that my roommate was not okay. Maybe I was trying to save him in the dream because I wished I could save him in real life. That explanation has stayed with me too. But no matter how I try to make it logical, one detail keeps coming back. He told me about that exact corner before I told him what I saw, not after. Before, he said he had felt heavy energy there all year. He said he hated that side of the room. He said he would not put his belongings there. He said he would not sleep facing it. Then, I told him that was where the figure stood. We both sat there in shock. We did not tell everyone else in the house. We did not bring in someone to bless the room. We did not research the house history. We did not try to prove anything. We were leaving anyway. Maybe that made it easier to let it go. Once he moved out and I moved on with school, I did not have to walk past his room every day. I did not have to wonder whether the corner still felt cold. I did not have to hear him moving around late at night or think about what I saw in that dream. The experience did not repeat. I never saw the gray figure again. I never had another dream exactly like it. My roommate and I did not keep talking about it afterward. We both seemed to silently agree that it was something we did not know how to handle. Maybe he forgot about it more easily than I did. Maybe he explained it away. Maybe he thought the whole thing was coincidence. I do not know, but I still think about it sometimes. I think about the hallway, the cold air behind his door, the feeling in my body telling me to leave, the back left corner, the creature's gray, scaly appearance, the way my vision seemed to fade when I looked into its eyes, and my roommate lying face down on the floor while that thing stood over him. I cannot say what it was. I cannot say it was a demon, a ghost, an entity, or anything else. I cannot say that my dream was an out-of-body experience, even though that is what it felt like. I know dreams can feel completely real. I know sleep can combine fear, memory, concern, stress, and things we notice without consciously understanding. I know that moving through a difficult year with a struggling roommate could have given my mind plenty of material to create something terrifying. But I also know how it felt. It felt like I walked into that room. It felt like something was there. And it felt like my roommate had been carrying a weight that neither of us knew how to name. Even now, I do not know whether the dream was warning me about him, warning me about the room, or simply showing me what fear looked like when my mind finally gave it a face. All I know is that he avoided the same corner where I saw it, and neither of us had told the other why until the night before we left. When I was 18, my mom became seriously unwell and was admitted to hospital. She had pleurisy at the time, but that was only part of it. She already had a long history of health problems, and there always seemed to be something else the doctors were monitoring, treating, or worrying about. It was one of those periods where nobody in the family could fully relax, because every phone call might bring new information. I was in my first year at university then, so I was trying to balance normal student life with the fear of knowing my mom was sick in hospital. I would go to classes and sit through lectures, but part of my mind was always somewhere else. I would look at my phone constantly. Every missed call made my stomach drop. Every message from my brother or another family member felt like it might contain bad news. When I came home, the house felt different without her. My mom had a presence in the house that I had never properly noticed until she was not there. Her things were still around. Her usual chair was still where it belonged. Her bedroom still smelled like her. Her clothes were still in the drawers. But the rooms felt hollow without her moving through them. At the time, a friend of hers was staying in my room, so when I came home from university, I slept in my mom's bed. That felt strange in itself. It was not something I normally did. Her room was hers. Her bed was hers. Even though I had grown up in the house, being in her room without her there made me feel like I was occupying a space that should not have been empty. But there was nowhere else for me to sleep, and nobody thought much of it. The first night was uncomfortable, mostly because it was unfamiliar. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, thinking about the hospital. I kept imagining my mom in a hospital bed somewhere, surrounded by machines and nurses, trying to rest while people came in and out of the room. I remember wishing she was home, even if she was unwell, even if she needed help. I wanted her back in her own bed, in her own room, with the familiar sounds of the house around her. But she was not there. And I was. One night, I fell asleep in her bed without much trouble. I had probably been exhausted. The stress of traveling back and forth, university, worrying about my mom, and trying not to show how scared I was had caught up with me. I remember the room being dark, quiet, and still. At some point in the night, around 1 a.m, I half woke up. I did not wake suddenly from a nightmare. There was no loud sound, no phone ringing, no knock at the door. I simply opened my eyes enough to become aware that something had changed. At first, I thought someone had come into the room. I could feel the bed move. It was not a tiny shift like a spring settling or a blanket sliding. It felt like somebody had sat down on the edge of the mattress beside me. The weight came down near my legs or hip, and the bed dipped. I felt myself tip slightly forward with it. It was exactly the way a bed feels when someone sits beside you. There is a specific weight to it. The mattress lowers on one side. Your body shifts. You can feel the change even before you are fully awake. That was what I felt. Someone sitting on the edge of my mom's bed. Someone close enough that I should have been able to hear them breathe. For a moment, I stayed still. I was half asleep and trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was my brother. Maybe someone had come in because they had received news from the hospital. Maybe my mom's friend needed something. Maybe somebody was checking on me. But nobody spoke. There was no gentle voice saying my name. No hand on my shoulder. No movement toward the door. Just the pressure on the mattress. And the feeling that someone was sitting there, watching me sleep. That was when fear came over me. Not a loud, sudden panic. Something colder. A dark feeling that filled the room before I even knew what I was afraid of. I sat up and switched on the lamp. The light came on immediately. The bed was empty. There was nobody sitting beside me. The room was exactly as it had been before I fell asleep. The curtains were closed. The furniture stood in the same places. The door was shut. No one was in the corner. No one was standing in the hallway. No one had come into the room. But the feeling did not leave. It got worse. The instant I saw that nobody was there, a thought came into my mind with a force I cannot explain. My mum was dead. I did not think, maybe something has happened. I did not think I should check on the hospital. I felt certain for those first few moments that she was gone. It was a horrible feeling. Not a thought I chose, not something I reasoned my way into. It was like a heavy black certainty had dropped into my chest. I could not explain why I thought it. There had been no phone call. No one had knocked on my door. Nobody had told me anything. But I sat there in my mum's bed, under the light of that small lamp, feeling as though something terrible had happened to her. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself I had been worried about her for days. I told myself I had been sleeping in her room, in her bed, surrounded by reminders that she was in hospital. I told myself the mattress probably shifted because I moved in my sleep. I told myself I was half dreaming. I tried every reasonable explanation I could think of. Maybe I had rolled over and felt the springs move. Maybe the bed was old and had dipped under my body in a strange way. Maybe I had been having a dream about someone sitting beside me and woke up halfway through it. Maybe stress had made me jump straight to the worst possible conclusion. All of that made sense. But the feeling would not go away. I sat there for 5 minutes, then 10. The room stayed quiet. The bed stayed empty. But the sense that my mum was in danger only grew stronger. I remember staring at the phone, trying to decide whether I was overreacting. It was 1 in the morning. Hospitals do not want random calls from panicked family members asking for updates in the middle of the night unless there is a real emergency. I did not want to embarrass myself. I did not want the nurse to tell me my mum was asleep and stable and that I had worked myself into a panic over a dream. But I could not settle down. The feeling was too strong. Eventually, I called the hospital. I remember the sound of the phone ringing and how long it seemed to take for anyone to answer. I remember trying to make my voice sound calm when I gave my mum's name and explained that I was her child. The person on the phone did not immediately tell me everything. There was a pause. Then, they told me she had taken a turn for the worse. She was in intensive care. For a few seconds, I could not speak. The fear I had been trying to push away suddenly became real. It was not just a nightmare. It was not just a strange feeling in an empty room. Something had happened. My mum was in critical care. I called my brother. Or maybe he was already awake and someone had told him too. I do not remember every detail of how the calls happened after that. I only remember that we both went straight to the hospital. There was no time to think, no time to properly get dressed or make sense of what was happening. We just left. The roads were dark and quiet. The world outside looked normal, but inside the car, everything felt unreal. I remember sitting there and trying not to imagine the worst. I kept thinking about the feeling of someone sitting on the bed. I kept thinking about the pressure on the mattress. I kept thinking about the horrible certainty that had entered my mind before I even picked up the phone. The hospital was bright in the way hospitals always are at night. Too bright, too clean, too quiet in some places and too busy in others. There were fluorescent lights, shiny floors, machines beeping from behind doors, people speaking in low professional voices, and nurses moving quickly through hallways that seemed endless. My brother and I sat outside intensive care while the staff worked on her. There was nothing else we could do. We could not go in. We could not help. We could only wait. I remember sitting there, watching doors open and close, trying to read the expressions on every nurse's face. Whenever someone walked out of intensive care, I looked up immediately. Every movement in the hall made me think someone was coming to tell us something. Time in a hospital waiting area does not move normally. Minutes feel like hours. You become aware of every sound. A phone ringing at the desk. A trolley moving past. The squeak of shoes on the floor. A distant machine alarm. A door clicking shut. Everything becomes part of the waiting. Eventually, we learned what had happened. She had developed sepsis, connected to a PICC line that had been fitted while she was on the ward. We were told that there had been an issue with how the line had been managed, and infection had set in. By the time the situation became critical, her heart had stopped twice. The first time it stopped was around the same time I woke up in her bed. That fact has stayed with me more than anything else. I know there may be a rational explanation. I know that I had been worried about her. I know I was sleeping in her room, in her bed, while she was seriously ill in hospital. I know people can wake from vivid dreams and feel convinced that something terrible has happened because the mind is already prepared for loss. But I cannot forget the timing. I woke up because I felt the bed dip. I felt someone sit beside me. I turned on the lamp and found nobody there. Then I was overwhelmed by the certainty that my mom was gone. And when I called, she was in intensive care after her heart had already stopped. I do not know what happened in that room. Maybe I was half asleep and dreamed it. Maybe my body shifted in bed at the exact moment my mind was already worrying about my mom. Maybe the mattress dipped because of old springs. Maybe stress, exhaustion, and fear made everything feel more meaningful than it was. But it did not feel like a normal dream. It felt like someone had come to sit beside me. Not to scare me, not to threaten me, just to make sure I woke up. That is the only way I can explain the feeling. It was not a presence that felt cruel or malicious. It was heavy and sad. It felt like grief before there was any reason for me to know grief was coming. I have thought about whether it could have been my mom somehow reaching out. I do not know if I believe that. She was alive. She was fighting for her life in intensive care. Maybe some part of me already knew she was in danger because of how worried I had been. Maybe I had noticed changes in her condition earlier that other people had not paid attention to. Maybe my mind put all the pieces together while I slept. But when I remember it, I do not remember it as intuition alone. I remember physical weight on the bed. I remember the dip beside me. I remember feeling myself tilt forward as though someone had sat close enough to touch me. And I remember sitting under the lamp, knowing something was terribly wrong before the hospital confirmed it. My mom survived that night. That is important. She had been through more than anyone should have had to go through, and the staff in intensive care worked to bring her back. The fact that her heart stopped twice, and she still survived, made everything feel even more unreal. For a long time afterward, I could not sleep in her bed without thinking about it. The room felt different, not haunted exactly. Not scary in the way a dark hallway or a strange noise can be scary. It felt sacred in a strange, sad way, like something had happened there that I could not explain, but could not deny. Sometimes I would look at the edge of the bed and remember the feeling of the mattress lowering. I would wonder whether someone had really been there. I would wonder whether it was my imagination, my fear, or something deeper. The strange thing is that I did not feel afraid of the thing that sat beside me. I was afraid of what I believed it meant. I was afraid that my mom had died. I was afraid of being alone in her room with that knowledge. But the presence itself did not feel angry. It did not feel threatening. It felt like a warning, or maybe a goodbye that came too early. Afterward, I told my brother what happened. I do not remember whether I told him that same night or later, once the immediate shock had passed. But I told him that I woke up feeling someone sit on the bed and immediately believed Mum was dead. He may have listened quietly. He may have had his own feelings or experiences around that night. Families often carry fear differently. One person remembers the hospital hallway. Another remembers the drive. Another remembers the phone call. Another remembers the exact moment they realized everything had changed. For me, it was the bed, the lamp, the empty room, the feeling that came before the call. I still do not know what to call it. A dream? A stress response? A coincidence? A strange form of intuition? Something spiritual? I do not know. But I know the experience was real to me. I know I did not wake up because of a phone ringing. I know nobody in the house came into the room. I know I felt the mattress dip. And I know the hospital confirmed that my mom had taken a catastrophic turn at almost the same moment. Some people may say grief and fear make people search for meaning in coincidences. Maybe that is true. When someone you love is close to death, your mind can become hyper-aware. Every sound feels important. Every dream feels like a message. Every strange feeling becomes something you replay for years. But sometimes, even knowing that, the timing is too exact to forget. I can still picture that room. The soft yellow light from the lamp. The dark shapes of my mum's furniture. The empty edge of the bed beside me. The place where I had felt someone sit. And the phone in my hand while I tried to make my voice steady enough to ask the hospital whether my mum was okay. She was not okay. Not then. She had been fighting for her life. And somehow, before anyone told me, I woke up knowing that something had changed. I do not know whether it was my mind, my mother, or something neither of us could explain. But I have never forgotten the weight on the bed beside me. And I do not think I ever will. When I was a child, I was raised in a country home far out in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place where you could stand outside and not see another house for a long time. There were fields, trees, gravel roads, and long stretches of quiet that felt normal when you grew up around them. In the daytime, the house felt big and open. Sunlight came through the windows. Dust moved in the air, and you could hear birds outside or the wind pushing through the trees. At night, it felt much bigger. The house had large rooms, long hallways, and enough space that you could be in one part of it without hearing someone in another. It was not empty all the time. I had family around, and my cousins were often there to keep me company. We played together in the house because there was so much room to move around. We made up games in bedrooms, hallways, closets, and the bigger shared rooms. We would run from one end of the house to the other, hide behind furniture, build little forts, and pretend the rooms were different worlds. When you are a child, a big house can become anything. One room can be a castle. Another can be a hiding place. A dark hallway can become a dangerous forest. Most of the time, it was fun. But there were also times when the house felt too quiet. There were moments when everyone else was outside, away somewhere, busy in another part of the property, or simply not home. On those days, I would be playing alone in my room. I knew I was basically the only person inside the house. If anyone had asked, that was what I would have said. I was alone. That was why the first time it happened confused me so much. I was in my room playing by myself. I do not remember exactly what I was doing. I might have been sitting on the floor with toys, drawing, reading, or making up some kind of game. It was an ordinary afternoon. The house was quiet in the way country houses often are. There was no television playing in the background, no one talking in the kitchen, No cousins running around in the hall, no footsteps upstairs or downstairs, just me. Then I heard someone whisper my name. It was close, too close. It sounded like it came from right beside my ear, not from the hallway, not from another room, not from outside the window. It was as though someone had leaned close enough to whisper directly beside me. I froze. For a second, I did not turn around. I remember that feeling of suddenly becoming aware of every part of the room. The walls, the door, the closet, the window, the floor behind me. Everything that had seemed normal a moment before became something I needed to look at. Then, I turned. There was nobody there. The room was empty. The door was closed or open exactly the way I remembered it being. Nothing had moved. No one was standing behind me. No one was hiding in the corner. No one was in the hallway outside. I remember sitting there for a moment, waiting to hear it again. Nothing happened. At first, I did not think too much about it. Kids hear strange things all the time. A house makes noises. Wind moves through gaps in windows. Pipes knock. Trees scrape against the outside walls. Sometimes a sound can carry in a weird way, especially in a big house. I probably told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone outside had called my name and it sounded closer than it really was. Maybe one of my cousins had been playing a joke and then ran away. Maybe I had imagined it because I was alone and bored, so I went back to what I was doing. But later, it happened again. I was alone in the house, or at least I believed I was. I heard my name whispered beside my ear. This time, I reacted faster. I looked around immediately. Nothing. No cousin. No adult. No one standing behind me. I checked the doorway. I looked down the hallway. I listened for footsteps moving away. I waited for someone to laugh or call out, thinking maybe they had scared me on purpose. There was nothing. The house was silent. That second time made me more nervous. The first time could have been anything. A strange sound, my imagination, a voice carrying from outside. But the second time was harder to ignore because it sounded the same. A whisper, my name, right next to my ear. After that, I started noticing how alone I felt in certain rooms. The house itself had not changed, but my awareness of it had. Before, being alone in my room was normal. I could play for hours and not think about it. After the whispers started, I found myself looking toward the doorway more often. I would pause when I heard the house settle. I would wonder whether I had left a door open. I would listen for someone walking down the hall. I did not tell any adults. I do not know exactly why. Maybe I thought they would laugh at me. Maybe I worried they would say I was making things up. Maybe I did not want them to think I was scared. Or maybe I did not fully understand how strange it was yet. At that age, you can accept something frightening without knowing what to do with it. You tell yourself that maybe it will stop. You keep it private, because saying it out loud makes it feel more real. So, I kept it to myself. The whispers happened a few more times. Not every day. Not often enough for me to get used to them. They would happen when I was alone, usually when I was focused on something else. I would be playing, sitting quietly, or moving through a room, and suddenly I would hear my name. Sometimes it sounded soft. Sometimes it sounded more urgent. But it was always close. It was never a full conversation. It never said anything besides my name. It did not tell me to come somewhere. It did not threaten me. It did not laugh. It did not sound angry. That almost made it worse, because there was no way to understand what it wanted. A voice calling your name from the hallway would be normal. Someone could be looking for you. Someone could need help. Someone could be calling you to dinner. But a whisper beside your ear, when no one is in the house, feels different. It feels personal. It feels like the voice knows exactly where you are. I started turning around whenever I heard my name, even when no one had said it. Sometimes a branch would scrape against the window, and I would jump. Sometimes wind would move through the house in a way that sounded almost like a person speaking, and I would sit completely still, trying to decide whether I had heard something. The big rooms that had once felt fun began to feel too open. The hallways felt longer. The spaces between rooms felt darker. I remember being especially uncomfortable when I had to walk from my room to another part of the house alone. I would move quickly, even in daylight. I would avoid stopping in the middle of the hallway. I would not look into rooms that were empty and dark. Still, I never actually saw anything. That is important. I never saw a person standing behind me. I never saw a shadow move across a wall. I never found someone hiding in the house. It was only the whisper. My name. Over and over, on different days, when I thought I was alone. For a while, I wondered if I was just hearing my own thoughts. Maybe I had said my name in my head, and it felt like it came from outside. Maybe I was young, and my imagination was stronger than I realized. Maybe being in a quiet country house made every small sound feel bigger. That explanation made sense to me sometimes. But then, I would hear it again. And it never sounded like my own voice. It sounded like someone else. I cannot remember the exact voice now. I do not know whether it sounded male or female. I do not know whether it sounded old or young. I only remember that it was a whisper, and that it sounded close enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. Eventually, I stopped expecting it. That may sound strange, but when something happens enough times without becoming worse, you begin to push it into the background. I still did not like being alone in certain parts of the house, but I also did not think about the whispers every day. Then one day, my cousins and I were talking. We were just having a normal conversation. It might have been while we were playing, sitting around after dinner, or spending time together in one of the larger rooms. I do not remember exactly how the subject came up. Maybe someone mentioned the house being quiet. Maybe one of us said we did not like being alone upstairs. Maybe we were telling scary stories because kids always end up doing that when they have nothing else to do. Whatever started the conversation, one of my cousins mentioned hearing something strange when they were alone in the house. They said they had heard someone whisper their name. I remember feeling cold immediately. I do not think I said anything at first. I probably waited to see whether they meant something ordinary. Maybe they had heard an adult calling from outside. Maybe they were talking about a different house or a different time. But then another cousin said something similar had happened to them, too. They had been playing alone. They thought nobody else was inside. Then they heard a whisper beside them. Their name. The same kind of thing I had heard. That was when I finally said something. I told them it had happened to me, too. For a moment, we all just looked at each other. None of us had talked about it before. None of us had told an adult. None of us had told the others while it was happening. We had all assumed it was just something strange that happened to us alone. That made it harder to dismiss. When you are a child, you can convince yourself that your imagination is the problem. You can tell yourself you were tired, scared, or bored. But hearing that your cousins had experienced the same thing in the same house made it feel different. We started comparing details. They said it happened when they were playing alone, too. They said the voice sounded close. They said they looked around and did not see anyone. They said they did not tell adults because they thought it was odd, but did not want to make a big deal out of it. That was almost exactly how I felt. None of us had a full explanation. We did not know whether it was one voice or different voices. We did not know whether it happened in the same room every time. We did not know whether it happened during the day or at night. We only knew that something in that house had whispered our names when we thought nobody else was there. For a while after we talked about it, the house felt different to all of us. When we played together, we stayed closer. We did not like separating into different rooms as much. We might have joked about it, because kids often joke when they are afraid, but I think all of us were unsettled. You would hear someone say, "Did you call me?" And the answer would be no. Sometimes someone would think they heard a voice from another room, and we would all stop talking for a second. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No doors slammed. No objects moved. No one saw a figure standing in the hall. There was never a moment where an adult came running in because something had happened. The whispers were the only thing. But they were enough. The strange part is that they eventually stopped. I do not remember the last time I heard one. There was no final event, no explanation, no moment where we discovered it had been a person outside, a radio, a neighbor, or some sound carrying through the house. One day, they simply stopped happening. As I got older, I spent less time playing alone in rooms. Life changed. My cousins and I got older too. The house became less of a giant world to explore and more of a normal family home. But I never forgot those whispers. Every so often, I still think about them. I think about how clear they sounded. I think about the feeling of hearing my name directly beside my ear and turning around to find nobody there. I think about my cousins admitting that the same thing happened to them. There are possible explanations. Old country homes make strange sounds. Wind can carry voices through walls, vents, chimneys, and open windows. A sound from outside can travel in a way that makes it seem much closer. A person calling from far away can sound like they are in the room with you, especially when there are trees, open land, and empty rooms around you. Maybe adults were calling for us, and we did not know where the sound came from. Maybe neighbors or family members were nearby without us realizing. Maybe one cousin heard something normal, told the others, and the memory changed over time. Maybe we were all young enough that our imaginations filled in the gaps. That is possible. Memory is not always perfect, especially childhood memory. But the fact that we had not discussed it until one casual conversation has always stayed with me. We did not create the story together first. We each had our own version of it. We each had heard our own name. We each had looked around and found nothing. Maybe that is why I remember it so clearly. It was never the loudest or most dramatic thing that happened in that house. There was no proof, no photograph, no one else who heard it at the same time. Just a whisper in the side of the ear. A name spoken softly when nobody should have been there. And a group of children who eventually realized they had all been hearing it. It eventually stopped. But even now, I sometimes remember what it felt like to be alone in that big country house, standing still after hearing someone whisper my name. And for a second, I still expect to turn around and find someone there. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. It happened in 2006, when I was living in a rural area where there was not much nearby. The kind of place where nearby had a different meaning than it did in town. There were houses in the general area, but none of them were close enough that you could easily see people moving around at night. The nearest place I can remember clearly was a gas station about a quarter mile away. That may not sound far, but when you are standing outside in the dark, and there are no streetlights, no sidewalks, and no nearby houses with porch lights on, a quarter-mile can feel like another world. The road by the house was quiet most of the time. During the day, you would occasionally hear a car pass. You might hear a truck pulling in at the gas station, somebody mowing a lawn farther down the road, or the distant sound of people doing normal things outside. But at night, the area went still. The quiet was never completely silent. Rural places have their own sounds. Wind moves through trees. The house shifts and creaks. A vehicle might pass on the road once in a while. Insects make noise in warmer months. You can hear things that people in busier areas never notice because traffic and neighbors cover them up. I was used to that. I knew what the house normally sounded like. I knew the sound of the furnace kicking on. I knew the small noises from pipes. I knew the sound of the refrigerator, the television, the floor settling, and the wind brushing against the outside walls. What I heard that night was not one of those things. I was downstairs by myself watching TV late at night. I do not remember what I was watching. It was probably nothing important. Something to pass the time. Maybe a movie, maybe a rerun, maybe one of those programs you leave on because the house feels too quiet without background noise. The television was loud enough to fill the room, but not so loud that I could not hear what was happening around me. I was sitting there, relaxed, not expecting anything strange. Then I heard a growl. At first, I thought it was part of the show. That was my first assumption. A TV growl, a sound effect, a dog in a scene, maybe something from a commercial, but it did not sound like it came from the television. It sounded close, too close. It was low and rough, like an animal growling, but there was something wrong with it. It did not sound exactly like a dog. It did not sound like a cat. It did not sound like an animal I could easily identify. It was deeper than that. It had the uneven sound of something alive breathing through a growl. For a second, I sat there without moving. I listened for it again. Nothing happened. The TV continued playing. The room looked normal. The lights were on. The furniture was exactly where it always was. There was nothing under the table, nothing by the doorway, nothing moving near the hall. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it. Maybe it really had come from the television. Maybe I had heard a truck engine outside, and my brain turned it into something else. Maybe the house had made one of those deep, strange noises old homes sometimes make when the temperature changes. But I could not let it go. The sound had felt too close. It had felt like it was inside the house. That was the part that bothered me. We did not have any pets. No dog, no cat, no animal that could be wandering from room to room or hiding somewhere behind furniture. And as far as I knew, none of the neighbors had animals close enough to get into our home. Even if somebody farther away had a dog, how would it get inside? There was no reason for an animal to be in the house, and no reason for it to be making a sound from somewhere I could not see. I reached for the remote and muted the television. The sudden silence made the whole room feel larger. Without the TV, I could hear the house more clearly. The refrigerator humming from another room. A faint sound from the heating system. Maybe the wind outside. And my own breathing. I sat still, waiting. At that point, I was trying to prove to myself that I had made it up. I wanted the next minute to pass quietly, so I could turn the television back on, laugh at myself, and forget it. Then, it happened again. The growl came back. This time, it was clearer. It was low, rough, and animal-like, but not fully animal. It did not have the sharp bark of a dog or the high, angry sound of a cat. It was deeper and more drawn out. It almost sounded like something trying to make an animal noise without quite getting it right. The sound made my stomach drop, and this time I could tell where it was coming from. A vent. It sounded like the growl was moving through the heating vent somewhere near the room. That was worse than hearing it in the house. If the noise had come from outside, I could have blamed wildlife. There were plenty of possible animals in rural areas. Coyotes, raccoons, stray dogs, foxes, or any number of things could make strange noises in the dark. But a vent meant the sound was inside the walls, or under the floor, or moving through the ductwork. It was like something had put its mouth close to an opening in the house and growled through it. I remember staring at the vent. It was just a normal vent. A metal grate. Nothing moving behind it. No shadows, no scratching, no warm breath blowing out. But after hearing that sound, I could not look at it without imagining something on the other side. I did not stay downstairs to investigate. I ran upstairs. I went straight to wake my ex. At the time, we were together, and they were asleep upstairs. I woke them up quickly and started trying to explain what I had heard. I know I probably sounded shaken. I told them there was some kind of growling sound downstairs. I told them it sounded like an animal, but not exactly like one. I told them I thought it was coming from the vents. At first, they were half asleep and confused. Anyone would be. You wake someone up in the middle of the night and say you heard a strange growl in the vents, and it sounds like you are having a bad dream or letting your imagination get away from you. I was trying to explain it as clearly as I could. Then the sound came again, right while I was telling them. This time, they heard it too. That changed everything. I remember looking at them, and they looked back at me. Neither of us said much for a moment. The growl was not coming from the television because the television was downstairs and muted. It was not something only I heard. It was not a dream because we were both standing there awake. It came through the vent again. Low, close, wrong. My ex agreed that it sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the ductwork. We stood in the bedroom listening. Neither of us wanted to get too close to the vent. That sounds silly now, maybe, but when you hear an unknown sound coming through the walls of your home, your mind starts creating possibilities you do not want to consider. We asked each other what it could be. A raccoon in the ducts? A stray animal under the house? Something caught in the vents? A neighbor's dog barking somewhere far away with the sound traveling through the structure? A problem with the furnace? A pipe? A loose piece of metal making a strange vibration? But none of those explanations fit the sound exactly. It did not sound mechanical. It did not sound like a pipe knocking. It did not sound like an engine. It sounded like a growl. And whatever it was, it sounded awake. We checked what we could. We looked around the rooms. We checked doors and windows. We looked down the hallway. We listened near other vents. We tried to figure out whether the sound was stronger in one part of the house than another. There was nothing obvious. No animal running through the rooms, no damaged vent cover, no sign that something had torn into the house. No scratching in the walls that I remember. No smell. No movement. No footprints. Nothing. We did not go tearing apart the ductwork in the middle of the night, obviously. There was no way to do that safely, and neither of us knew what we would do if we actually found an animal inside. But we listened. We waited. We kept expecting the growl to come again. It never did. The rest of the night was quiet. That almost made it worse. If it had kept happening, maybe we would have found a source. Maybe an animal would have moved through a wall, knocked something over, scratched at a vent, or made enough noise that we could identify it. But it stopped. No slow fading away. No clear final sound. Just silence. We stayed awake for a while after that. We talked quietly and tried to convince ourselves that there had to be a reasonable explanation. The house was old. Rural houses attract animals. Maybe something had gotten under the floor or into an access area and made a sound that traveled strangely through the vents. That was the explanation we wanted. Something ordinary. Something that could be repaired or removed, but we never found proof of it. There were no signs of an animal living in the house afterward. No droppings, no claw marks, no torn insulation, no chewed wires, no smell, no dead animal in the vents, no repeated growling. Nothing the next day. The house felt normal again. Sunlight came through the windows. The rural area looked ordinary. The gas station down the road was there, as always. Cars passed. The world did not seem haunted or dangerous in daylight. But I kept noticing the vents. Every time the furnace turned on, I listened. Every time the house made a noise, I stopped and waited. For weeks afterward, I expected to hear it again. I never did. My ex never heard it again, either. Whatever made that growl happened only that one night. Years later, I heard people from the area talking about skinwalkers. I need to be careful with that word because it gets used loosely by people who do not always understand the cultural meaning behind it. At the time of the incident, I had never heard those stories. I did not know anything about them. I was not sitting in that house expecting something paranormal, and I was not trying to connect random sounds to local folklore. But after hearing people talk about strange creatures, voices, animal sounds, and things that seemed almost human but not quite, I started wondering whether what I heard had been something more than an animal. I do not know. I never saw anything. That is important. I did not see a figure outside the house. I did not see glowing eyes in the yard. I did not see something moving near the gas station or along the road. I did not hear footsteps on the roof. I did not hear someone calling my name. All I heard was a growl, a low, rough, animal-like sound that came from inside the house, or at least sounded like it did. And my ex heard it too. That is why I have never been able to fully dismiss it. If I had been alone, I could tell myself I was tired. I could blame the television, the wind, stress, or a weird dream. I could say I half heard a noise and let my imagination fill in the rest. But someone else was there. I woke them up. I was explaining what happened. Then the growl happened again. They heard it without me telling them exactly what to listen for. They agreed it sounded like it came through the vent. We both heard the same thing. Still, I know there are ordinary explanations. Animals can make frightening noises. Coyotes can make sounds that do not seem real if you have never heard them before. Foxes can scream in ways that sound almost human. Raccoons can growl, snarl, and fight in walls or crawl spaces. Stray dogs can make low noises that travel farther than you expect. Even deer can make unsettling sounds in the dark. A house can also change the way sounds travel. A sound outside can enter an open vent, crawl space, chimney, or gap in the siding and come through a duct like it is inside the room. A low-frequency sound can become distorted by metal and wood. Something that starts outside might sound as if it is only a few feet away. Maybe an animal was under the house. Maybe it had gotten near an intake vent. Maybe two animals were fighting somewhere outside, and the ductwork carried the noise in a strange way. Maybe it was an old furnace making a sound that sounded more alive than it really was. All of that is possible. But I still remember how it felt in the moment. I remember muting the television. I remember the silence after the first sound. I remember hearing it again and realizing it was not coming from the show. I remember staring at the vent and feeling certain that whatever made the noise was too close. I remember running upstairs. I remember waking my ex. And I remember the relief and fear I felt at the same time when the sound came again and they heard it too. Relief because I was not imagining it. Fear because it meant it was real. After that night, I never heard it again. There was no repeat event, no answer, no animal discovered in the ducts, no explanation from a repair person, no strange sighting outside. The house stayed quiet. But sometimes, especially when I think about rural places at night, I remember that sound. The television low in the background, the empty house, the distance to the nearest gas station, the dark space around the property. Then that growl, deep and close, coming from a place where there should have been nothing at all. It may have been an animal. It may have been an ordinary sound twisted by a vent. It may have been something I will never understand. But for one night in 2006, something in that house sounded alive. And neither of us could figure out what it was. When I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I was scared of the night. I do not mean the normal kind of fear children have when the lights go out. It was stronger than that. Sometimes I would wake up with stomach pain that seemed to come from anxiety. I did not understand the word anxiety then, of course. I only knew that I would wake up in the dark with a tight, sick feeling in my stomach and a horrible sense that something was wrong. Nothing had to be happening for me to feel it. The house could be quiet. My parents could be asleep. Everything could be normal. But I would wake up terrified anyway. When that happened, I would go to my parents' room. Some nights, they would let me sleep between them because I was too scared to stay alone in my own bed. Their room felt safer. The sound of their breathing helped. The warmth of the blankets helped. Knowing they were close enough to reach made the fear feel smaller. At that age, my parents' bed felt like the safest place in the world. It was big, warm, and familiar. The room smelled like my mom and dad. There were shapes I recognized, even in the dark. The dresser, the curtains, the bedroom door, the lamp by the bed. When I was between them, I felt protected from whatever my imagination thought might be, waiting in the rest of the house. One night, I woke up with that same frightened feeling. My stomach hurt, and I did not want to be alone. I went to my parents' room and got into bed between them. I remember settling under the covers and trying to calm down. My mom was on one side of me, my dad on the other. The room was dark, but having them there made me feel better. For a while, I must have started to relax. Then I got thirsty. I asked my dad for some water. He got up from the bed and went into the kitchen to get it for me. I remember hearing him leave the room. I remember the mattress lifting slightly as he stood. I remember the darkness changing after he was gone, because one side of the bed was suddenly empty. At first, I was not afraid. I knew my dad had only gone to the kitchen. He was coming right back. I was still between my parents, still under the blankets, still in a familiar room, but waiting in the dark can feel much longer when you are little. I lay there listening. The house was quiet. I could not hear much from the kitchen. Maybe I heard a cupboard open. Maybe I heard the faint sound of a glass being filled. Or maybe I only imagined those sounds later because I knew where he had gone. All I remember clearly is staring into the darkness while I waited. Then I saw someone come into the room. At least, I thought I did. A silhouette moved through the doorway. It was dark enough that I could not see a face clearly at first. I only saw the shape of a person. The outline looked like my dad. It was about his height. It moved the way I expected him to move. It came toward the side of the bed where I was lying. Because I was so young, I did not question it. I thought it was him. I assumed he had come back with the water. The figure stopped beside my side of the bed. For a moment, I remember feeling relieved. Dad was back. But then I looked up at its face. Something was wrong. I cannot explain exactly what the face looked like, because even now the memory feels broken around that part. It was dark, but I could see enough to know that the thing standing beside the bed was not behaving like my dad. It did not speak. It did not hand me water. It did not bend down to comfort me. It just stood there. Then it began to do something impossible. I watched its head seem to separate from its body in a slow, unreal way. There was no normal movement, no logical explanation, and no way for my young mind to understand what I was seeing. It was not like watching someone get hurt in a movie. It was slower and stranger than that. It looked as though the figure was calmly destroying itself in front of me. I remember staring in complete shock. I did not know how to process it. I thought it was my dad. That was the worst part. I believed my dad had returned from the kitchen, stood beside the bed, and was dying in front of me. I started screaming. I begged him to stop. I kept crying and saying that I was scared. I begged my dad not to do it. I remember feeling helpless because I was too small to understand how to help him or what was happening. The terror was immediate. It was not only fear of the figure. It was the fear that my father was gone. The fear that I had watched something terrible happen to him and could not stop it. The fear that I was trapped in the dark between my sleeping mum and an empty place where my dad should have been. I cried so hard that I could barely breathe. Then my real dad ran into the room from the kitchen. He turned on the light. Everything changed in 1 second. The figure was gone. There was no one standing beside the bed. No body. No blood. No water glass dropped on the floor. No sign that anything had happened. My dad was alive, standing in the doorway, confused and frightened because I was screaming. He asked me what was wrong. He asked why I was crying, but I could not explain it. I was too young. I was too scared. I remember being relieved beyond words that it was really him. I remember seeing his face in the light and realizing he was safe. He had come from the kitchen exactly as he said he would. He had never been beside the bed. The thing I saw had not been him. But that did not make the fear disappear. It almost made it more confusing. If it was not my dad, then what had walked into the room? If it was not my dad, why did it look like him? If it was only my imagination, why did it feel so real? At 4 or 5 years old, I did not have language for those questions. I did not know about nightmares, sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, or the strange things the brain can do when you are half awake and terrified. I only knew that I had seen something impossible and that my dad had arrived too late to see it. I could not properly tell him what I had seen. Maybe I tried. Maybe I only cried and pointed. Maybe I said something like, "You were there," or "You did something," without being able to explain what I meant. I do not remember the exact words I used. I only remember how confused I felt. I wanted my dad to understand. But I did not know how to describe something that did not make sense even to me. He and my mom probably tried to calm me down. They may have told me I had a bad dream. They may have told me I was safe. They may have checked the room, turned on more lights, given me the water, and stayed awake with me until I settled down. I do not remember every detail after that, but I remember the image. I remember the shadowy person standing next to the bed. I remember believing it was my dad. I remember the feeling of watching something terrible happen while I begged it to stop. And I remember the relief when my actual dad came rushing back into the room, alive and confused, holding the water he had gone to get. That memory has stayed with me for my whole life. It is one of those childhood memories that does not fade, even though the details around it become blurry. I do not remember what the room looked like exactly. I do not remember what pajamas I wore. I do not remember whether it was raining outside or whether the hallway light was on. But I remember the darkness. I remember being between my parents. I remember my dad leaving for the kitchen. And I remember something that looked like him coming back. For years, I did not know what to make of it. Part of me has always believed it was too real to be only imagination. It did not feel like a dream where the scene changes suddenly or things happen without logic. It felt physical. I saw a person's shaped figure enter the room. I watched it stand beside the bed. I felt fear in my body before I understood why. But another part of me knows I was a terrified child. I had anxiety at night. I woke up with stomach aches. I was often scared to sleep alone. I was already in a vulnerable state, half awake in a dark room, waiting for my dad to return. That is the perfect situation for the mind to create something frightening. A child's brain can turn a coat hanging on a door into a person. A shadow can become a face. The sound of a parent moving in another room can become footsteps close to the bed. And when you are half asleep, you can experience images that feel completely real, even though they are part of a dream that has leaked into waking life. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe I was drifting in and out of sleep. Maybe I heard my dad leaving and then started dreaming that he returned. Maybe my fear of being alone for even a minute turned his silhouette into something terrifying. Maybe my brain created the impossible image because I was already anxious and did not know how to handle the dark. That explanation is possible. It is probably the explanation most people would choose, but it does not erase how the moment felt. I did not wake up thinking I had a nightmare. I woke up thinking I had watched my dad die. I remember the panic of that realization. I remember trying to speak through crying. I remember feeling like the world had become unsafe in 1 second. The fact that my dad ran back in from the kitchen should have made everything better immediately. In one way, it did. I was so relieved that he was alive that I could barely process anything else. But the relief came with confusion. If he was in the kitchen, then who was beside the bed? That was the question that stayed with me. I did not see the figure leave. It did not walk back out through the door. It was simply gone when my dad turned on the light. The room had returned to normal. The shadows became ordinary furniture again. The side of the bed was empty. The air felt normal, but I never felt completely certain that I had imagined it. When I was older, I wondered whether it could have been a sleep-related hallucination. I have read that people can experience vivid images while waking up or falling asleep. They may see someone standing in their room. They may hear voices. They may feel pressure on the bed. The experience can feel completely real because the brain is partly awake but still producing dream imagery. That explanation makes sense. I had been sleeping. I had just half woken up. I was scared and anxious. The room was dark. My dad had left, which may have made me afraid of being alone. Maybe I saw a shape in the darkness, and my mind gave it his outline because I expected him to come back. Maybe the rest came from a nightmare that I did not remember starting. But it is hard to fully accept because of the emotional weight of it. Some memories are not frightening because you think they were supernatural. They are frightening because they happened at a time when you had no control over your own fear. I was a small child. I did not know what was real. I did not know how the mind worked. I only knew that I was scared, and that the person I trusted most appeared to become something terrifying in front of me. That kind of fear does not disappear just because you grow up. It changes shape. As an adult, I can reason through it. I can list possible explanations. I can say it was likely a nightmare, a waking dream, anxiety, darkness, or childhood imagination. But the memory still has power. Every now and then, I think about it before bed. Sometimes, when I see someone standing in a dark doorway, even for a second, I remember that silhouette. Sometimes, when a parent gets up to leave a room at night, I remember the exact feeling of waiting for my dad to come back with a glass of water. Sometimes, if I wake up in the dark and cannot immediately see the room clearly, I feel a small version of that old fear return. Not because I believe the figure is coming back, but because part of me remembers what it felt like to see someone who looked like my dad and realize they were not him. I never had the experience again. Nothing else like that happened in my parents' room. I did not start seeing figures at night regularly. I did not have a long series of paranormal experiences. There was only that one moment, that one night, that one silhouette, that one impossible image. And then my dad, alive and holding a glass of water, standing under the light and asking me why I was screaming. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was a nightmare that felt real because I woke in the middle of it. Maybe it was something else. I still do not know. But I know that when I remember it, I can still feel the same terror I felt as a child. And I can still remember the relief of seeing my real dad come through the door. I was recently incarcerated because of a Dewey, and I ended up staying in a building that had been standing since 1917. Even before anything strange happened, the place felt wrong. It was old in a way that went beyond cracked paint and worn floors. The building had a heavy feeling to it. The hallways were narrow, the walls were thick, and the lights always seemed too bright or too dim. There were old doors with scratched metal frames, small windows that barely let in daylight, and vents that made noises at night when everything else was quiet. You could feel the age of the place. It had been used by too many people for too many years. People had slept there scared, angry, sick, lonely, detoxing, crying, fighting, waiting for court, waiting for phone calls, waiting for somebody to come get them, or waiting for news they did not want to hear. Even during the day, it never felt peaceful. At night, it felt worse. Sleep in a place like that is not normal sleep. You are surrounded by strangers. You hear people talking in low voices, coughing, crying, snoring, shifting in their bunks, calling out in their sleep, or getting up to use the bathroom. Doors open and close. Officers walk through the hall. Lights come on at odd hours. Pipes clank. Someone is always awake somewhere. And even when the room is quiet, you never fully relax. You sleep with one ear open. You notice every sound. A bunk creaking can make you look up. A shoe dragging across the floor can make you tense. A whisper in the dark can sound like it is right beside you. The building had stories, too. Every old place does. Some people had been there longer than others, and they knew the rumors. One story people talked was about a girl who had died by suicide in the gym down the hall years before. I never knew how much of it was true. In places like that, stories travel fast. People add details. They make things scarier because there's not much else to do except sit around, watch the same walls, and talk. But the story stayed in my mind. The gym was not far away. You could pass the hallway leading toward it, and even if you did not see anything strange, you thought about it. You wondered what had happened there. You wondered if the building remembered it. I always loved hearing ghost stories before that. I was interested in them, but I kept a healthy distance from believing them completely. I liked the mystery. I liked the creepy details, But I also assumed that most things had an explanation. Someone heard a noise in a house, probably pipes. Someone saw a shadow, probably headlights or tired eyes. Something went missing, someone moved it and forgot. That was how I looked at things. Then I stayed in that building. The first strange thing I heard about involved hair. Two different girls at different times woke up with large pieces of hair missing. Not a few strands. Not hair that had broken off from being tangled in a bunk or caught on clothing. Noticeable sections, enough that other people could see it right away. The first girl blamed the person who slept next to her. That made sense at first. When you are sleeping in a room with other people, especially in a place where privacy barely exists, it is easy to assume somebody did something to you. But there were problems with that idea. The girl she blamed was in a top bunk, and the only things we had that could have possibly cut hair were dull fingernail clippers. Nobody had scissors. Nobody had razors. Nobody had anything sharp enough to quietly remove a visible section of someone's hair while they were asleep. The thought of someone climbing up to a top bunk in the middle of the night, using dull clippers, cutting a large piece of hair, and getting away without waking anyone did not seem realistic. Not in that environment. People did not sleep deeply there. You might close your eyes, but you were never fully out. You woke up from doors opening. You woke up when someone walked too close to your bunk. You woke up when another person sat down, turned over, got water, or whispered to someone else. The girl insisted she had gone to sleep with her hair normal. Then she woke up with a chunk missing. People argued about it for a while. Some thought it had to be another inmate. Some thought she had done it herself and did not remember. Some thought it had snapped off somehow. Others said it was impossible and did not want to talk about it. Then it happened to someone else. Another girl, different time, different situation. Again, she woke up with a large piece of hair missing. Not the same person, not the same bunk, not the same night, but the same kind of strange missing section that nobody could explain. After the second time, people got quieter about it. The story about the gym started coming up more often. The building already had a reputation for being creepy, and incidents like that gave everyone something to attach the fear to. But hair was only one thing. Stuff went missing. That happens in jail, of course. People borrow things, take things, hide things, lose things, or move things around. You do not always know who touched your belongings or when, but some things would disappear and then turn up in places that did not make sense. A person would swear they had placed something in one spot, then find it somewhere else later. Sometimes it was small items, things that could easily get mixed up. Other times, it was something people had been watching closely. A blanket folded at the end of a bunk would be on the floor. A personal item would disappear from a shelf, then show up farther away. A cup would be moved. A piece of clothing would be found in another area. Normally, you would blame another person. And sometimes that was probably the answer. But not every time. There were moments when people would look around the room, count who was there, and still have no explanation for how something had moved. One of the strangest things involved the showers. There was a row of showers, and the last one had a habit of turning on by itself between 2 and 4 in the morning. It did not happen every night. It happened just often enough that people noticed. You would be lying in your bunk half awake, listening to the building settle, and then suddenly hear water. The sound would start in the bathroom area. A steady rush, not a drip, not pipes making noise. The shower. At first, people would assume someone had gotten up to wash. Maybe they wanted privacy. Maybe they had trouble sleeping. Maybe they were trying to calm down. Maybe they had simply gone to use the bathroom and turned the wrong handle. But when people checked, nobody was there. The last shower would be running. The water would be spraying down, and the bathroom would be empty. People would turn it off. Then later, on another night, it would happen again, always around the same time. 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. Somewhere in that dead stretch of night when most people are asleep, but nobody feels safe enough to be deeply asleep. I heard it myself more than once. The first time, I tried not to think about it. I told myself old plumbing can do strange things. Maybe there was a pressure problem. Maybe a valve was loose. Maybe the building's pipes were so old that water could turn on without anyone touching it. That was possible. It was a building from 1917. A lot could be wrong with the plumbing. But the timing was strange. And after hearing it enough times, it started to feel less like a mechanical problem and more like something the building did when it was quiet. Still, I tried to stay logical. I did not want to turn every odd thing into a ghost story. Then I had my own experience. We were in a group meeting. It was one of those meetings where everyone sat in a circle and talked. The room was plain, like most rooms in the building. Nothing special, just chairs arranged in a circle, harsh overhead lights, and people trying to get through whatever program or meeting they were required to attend. I was sitting there listening. People were talking one at a time. The atmosphere was normal. Then I felt someone press down on my shoulder. It was not a brush. It was not a chair bumping into me. It was a clear pressure, like a hand placed on my shoulder from behind, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough that I felt it immediately. My whole body reacted. I turned around fast. There was nobody close enough to touch me. The people behind me were too far away. Nobody was leaning forward. Nobody had their arms stretched toward me. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was looking at me like they had played a joke. There was simply empty space behind my chair. For a second, I just stared. I looked around the circle. I probably asked someone if they had touched me. Nobody had. The people nearest to me had not moved. There was no reasonable way a person could have pressed on my shoulder without me seeing them or without someone else noticing. That was the moment that really got to me. Everything before that could be explained away. The hair could have been another person. The missing items could have been theft or carelessness. The shower could have been bad plumbing. The old building noises could have been pipes, vents, or people walking through the hall. But the shoulder touch was different. I felt it. It was physical. It happened in a room full of people. And when I turned around, there was no one there. I remember feeling cold all over. Not because the room was cold, because I suddenly realized how exposed I felt. There were people all around me, but I felt completely alone. After that, I did not have as easy a time dismissing other people's stories. The very next day, my side bunkie woke up terrified. She was the kind of person who had her own strange habits. She sucked her thumb while she slept, even as an adult. It was something she did without thinking, especially when she was stressed or trying to sleep. That morning, she said someone had pulled her hand out of her mouth. Not brushed it. Not accidentally bumped her. Pulled it. She woke up because she felt a grip on her wrist or hand, dragging it away from her mouth. At first, I might have rolled my eyes at a story like that. I might have assumed someone had messed with her. I might have thought she had moved in her sleep and dreamed it. But after the shoulder tap, I believed her. Not necessarily because I knew it was a ghost, but because I knew what it felt like to be touched by something when no one was close enough to touch you. She was scared. And I understood why. The building had started to feel different after that. The lights seemed harsher. The hallways seemed darker. The gym hallway made me uncomfortable, even when I was nowhere near it. I would hear water from the last shower late at night and feel my stomach tighten. I would notice people whispering about hair missing, things being moved, someone hearing their name, someone seeing a shadow by a door, and I could no longer immediately tell myself they were being dramatic. Maybe some of them were. In a place like that, stress can make everything feel worse. People are tired. People are scared. People are dealing with withdrawal, anxiety, shame, anger, court cases, broken relationships, and uncertainty. People are sleeping badly. They are trapped in unfamiliar rooms with strangers. They are trying to keep their minds together. That can make normal things seem paranormal. A person may lose track of an item and become convinced it moved by itself. A shower may turn on because of plumbing. A touch on the shoulder may be someone brushing past without realizing. A chunk of hair may be cut by another person, break off from damage, or be pulled loose during sleep. There are always explanations. I know that. But being there changed something in me. Before that place, I could listen to ghost stories and keep them at a distance. I could say that is creepy, but there is probably a reason. Afterward, I still believed there were reasons for most things, but I also understood that sometimes you experience something so direct that your brain cannot easily file it away. That shoulder press was like that. I still remember exactly how it felt. A weight, a hand, a clear pressure from behind me. Then, empty space. I did not see a face. I did not see a shadow standing behind me. I did not hear a voice. It was almost worse that way. Because there was nothing to blame, no one to point at, no obvious explanation. Just the feeling that something had been close enough to touch me, even though I was sitting in the middle of a circle of people. I never became someone who claims every strange thing as proof of ghosts. I still know old buildings make noises. I still know people can be mistaken. I still know fear can spread through a group and turn ordinary events into something much scarier. But I do not laugh at ghost stories the way I used to. Not after that building. Not after the shower turning on by itself in the middle of the night. Not after girls waking with missing chunks of hair. Not after things disappearing and showing up where they should not have been. Not after hearing the story about the gym down the hall. And definitely not after feeling someone press on my shoulder when nobody was there. That was the experience that changed me. Before that, I liked ghost stories. After that, I understood why people believed them. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.